Welcome to the Spirit of Truth video podcast. Joining me today is my good friend David Kantor. Welcome, David.
Hey, it's great to be here, Derek. It's a beautiful day in Boulder and wonderful to be with you in this context here.
All right. Well, stick around as we get to find out all about David's new project, his movie about Jesus, and all the questions that are popping up around that project. Welcome back. So, like I said, joining us today is David Kantor. Welcome again, David.
Thank you.
So on this beautiful day in Boulder, Colorado, we're graced with this talented filmmaker, and I know that you're working on a project about Jesus, and I just hoping maybe you'd kind of share a little bit of some intriguing details that fellow Urantia Book readers might find interesting.
Okay, well, it's really a huge topic. I've been working on this film for the last almost 5 years now, and I'm in the process of getting the narration fit into the screenplay. There are so many things of interest to Urantia Book readers, and it's terrible to have to cut them out so that I can fit into 90 to 110 minutes of screen time. I'm hoping that the film will stimulate people to check into some of these things.
Okay.
For example, one of the Urantia Book heroes is Athanasius.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Athanasius is just mentioned briefly in the Urantia Book, but it was an important juncture. But he played a major role in the early years. He was ruthless politically, and there was, just a lot of murder and mayhem in the scramble for power as the Roman Empire was collapsing. And this time frame is Council of Nicaea, early 4th century. And there's just this scramble for power. The church was scrambling to pick up the failing power of the Roman Empire. And it's in that context that we get this little comment about Athanasius. But the Arians were essentially a political party. And they were all Arian Christianity was all over the northern Mediterranean. In fact, there was a guy, Ulfilas, early on, late 3rd century, who was a Goth and inaugurated a mission to the Gothic tribes who were invading Europe from the north.
Whoa.
He actually translated not the New Testament, but the Gospels, translated the Gospels into the Gothic language, and they had no written language, so he had to create a written language in order to carry the story of the bestowal to these invading tribes. It's a whole huge chapter that's absolutely fascinating.
Heroic.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the Salem missionaries and all the work that they had to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one cool detail about the environment and the Ulfilas.
Ulfilas, Ulfilas, depending on who's describing them. There's several different spellings.
Cool, so that's an interesting find. I know you found a lot about people in the early church.
Yeah.
In particular, even women in some of their contributions. The gospel message being spread.
Well, yeah, in the early church, it was totally open. Basically, the men did the teaching and the women led worship. And I've got some really great, very early mosaics that show a typical early meeting with the man teaching over here and the women leading the worship. Really wonderful stuff.
Oh, wow. I got to get my hands on that.
Yeah.
Share that. That's a cool image to share. Hopefully we can get some images from you sometime down the road.
Yeah.
David here is the workhorse behind UB Films on Urantia Book Films online, and that has its affiliations with Urantia Book Network and Urantia Book Network app. It's an opportunity for the network to kind of grow in our affiliation, and it's a reason why maybe we're starting a new season here for Spirit of Truth podcast. It's been a while, about a year since we've really broadcast, and we started off with you as the first one. And I thought it was quite poetic to have you here because I've always looked up to you and admired all the ground that you broke for the Urantia revelation and the Urantia community as far as archiving, reporting, learning, researching, sharing, understanding origin, history, and destiny, and all that, kindred minds on this one that I really feel. And I just wanted to maybe get your personal feedback on how you feel the evolution of how we're progressing in this ongoing milieu of technology and revelation and society's morality, ebbs and flows of life and education and the home life and everything like that. Because you and I have an interesting perspective of how revelation integrates itself into the world and where it's going and things like that. And in that courageous thinking, we're not held up by any dogmas or doctrines or anything like that. And I was just wondering what your take was as a creative. I mean, you're obviously making a project to help somehow. How do you feel from when you were maybe my age working with Revelation to here now where you are?
Well, I got to tell you the truth, Derek. I'm really glad I'm not your age at this point. Boy, that's, there's some rough territory covered between being 20 and being 75. And,
definitely not 20. But yeah.
Oh, yeah. When I look at the world out there and all these things going down, I just see turbulence. Just turbulence. In fact, I went over to Glenwood Springs early this spring to shoot the spring runoff on the Colorado River. You get 8,000 cubic feet of water per second coming down that canyon, and it's just so turbulent. And that just speaks to me about what the culture's like out there today. And you can shoot that at 240 frames a second, and you can get every little drop of water flying through the air, but it takes off and it flies through the air for a moment, and then it's absorbed back into the turbulence. And I see so much in the world out there. It's just like that. It's a flash for a couple of years, and then it's just absorbed back in there. So how does this relate to having an epical revelation is what I have to think about, what I think you think about. What's the epical revelation going to accomplish? Is it going to still that turbulence? Or is it something that we need to work to put in place so that when the turbulence winds down, there's a new foundation to build a new culture?
Yeah.
And personally, I think there are two answers to that.
Okay.
One is, yes, laying the foundation, making sure that in the future there's something there to rebuild a totally deteriorated culture. On the other hand, I think there's still an opportunity to get that revelation into existing religious institutions while those institutions still exist. And if it could be gotten into those institutions, the period of time before the rebirth really happens can be really shortened. The amount of human suffering can be really shortened.
No, that's a good perspective. Yeah. Well, it makes you think about all the efforts of people who have tried to get this revelation out across the world. And, you're one of them. I gave a presentation just recently at the summer study session, and the title that I was given for it was, "Are we the new Salem missionaries? Or are we the modern day Salem missionaries?" And it got me in deep reflection, and I came up with, no, we're not. We're the champions of the world because we have Jesus on our team. And as we follow Jesus, who also has overcome the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I see you in that same vein, taking the spirit of truth into following the guidance and the direction into the way. And I feel that this now dovetails into your project, your video project, in more reflecting the life of Jesus and the influence of this revelation, right, throughout Christianity in the early days of the church into now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could give us a little bit of tie-in on that one for us.
Well, the thing that comes to mind when you talk about the Salem missionaries and are we in a similar situation is we're not, because we and everybody else out there has the spirit of truth functioning and thought adjusters. And that's huge.
Exactly.
It's really huge. Mm-hmm. So the challenge, I think, becomes something a little different. In the film, I'm positioning the Urantia book as a handbook for personal spiritual experience. Connect with God, grow with God, wallow in the life and teachings of Jesus and see what it's like when God lives among us. And then you've got all this cosmology, which is a whole nother topic.
Go ahead.
Well, one of the thrusts of the film is examining the crisis in Christianity today. What is this crisis? People are leaving the church. And I'm framing the crisis as a loss of story. Just a few hundred years ago, in the late 16th, early 17th century, the cosmology of Christianity was like a three-tier universe. There was the earth at the center of the universe. The cosmology basically went back to Aristotle with a few little tweaks from Egyptian astronomers in the 2nd century. But here's the earth at the center of the universe, and hell is in the middle, and then there are these planets, and then there's this dome with little holes in it, with the light of God coming through, and God's on his throne back there. And he sent Jesus down to this earth to try to take care of the problem of evil. I mean, it's just very simple cosmology. That was in place just a few hundred years ago. And along comes Copernicus. And Copernicus, he's just this little kind of nerdy guy, doing astronomical calculations. And things are getting really difficult with the calculations because of the retrograde motion, and things just weren't working out. And one day he just says, if I put the sun at the center instead of the earth, all these calculations fall in place. Wow. And it was like 100, maybe 120 years after Copernicus came Galileo, made the telescope. You get Tycho Brahe, you get all these other astronomers down to Newton. And within 120 years, the whole concept of the universe and how it works had changed. And the church was adamant that the scriptural picture was the right one. Even Martin Luther and John Calvin said, no, Copernicus is to be condemned. You need to go back to the earlier astronomy. The church didn't even let Galileo off the hook. I think it was 1982 that they finally let Galileo off the hook. So that has really chipped away at at Christianity's supportive story. I mean, the cosmology is not consistent with the biblical view. Yeah. And in addition to that, there's been all this historical study that's shown how the Bible got put together. It's this historical document, doesn't match up over here. So Christianity is basically out there with a collapsing story. And that's really critical, very critical.
That's a very intriguing angle that you're taking, and I fully respect it and appreciate it, because in part of the early Urantia Book study I did was a lot of part 3 in the history of this planet.
Yeah.
And the big thing in all of that study was giving myself our planet's story back and understanding who the big players were and everything, and the accurate history of what has unfolded and what we're in now and where we're going. And I would always have these new stories that were in my mind, and even create my own understandings of people like Van and Adamson, and different early apostles like Andrew and Nathaniel, and just have these new personalities. And that's something that I appreciate that you're doing. You're trying to give back heroes to our society so that hopefully people can understand where they're coming from and why this is a valuable thing, what they've accomplished.
Yeah. Well, if you stop and think about it, think about what you just said, what this has meant to you to get this history. With your Urantia Book readers, that history becomes part of your autobiography. And the story of the mansion worlds become a part of your autobiography, and now you're existing in this vastly expanded universe space that most people don't have. When you have no story, the only option is existentialism. Well, I'm just right in this moment here, right now, trying to deal with people and life. And you shrunk down into almost nothing. And the Urantia book expands that out. Here's something that I think is very important to understand. And I think about this a lot. We construct our personal identities out of the stories we tell ourselves about reality and the roles we imagine ourselves to be playing in those stories. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And to me, that is an extremely powerful concept. I mean, the role of story in a healthy psyche.
Well, we're, in my mind, building from that is that our inheritance is of creation. So we're creators, right? We're children of creators. We're children of God. We're children of Creator, Son, Creator, Mother, Spirit. We're creators. So we have this opportunity to have this foresight of what the potentials of roles or purpose, identity, and things like that. And I think as we learn to weave the mind with our creativity through personal free will, we actually can create through mind into what I see in our society is kind of like what you're trying to address, is that there isn't this sense of purpose and identity because there isn't this understanding of where we're coming from and what we have to build from.
Exactly.
And so where do we then view ourselves? Are we disassociating to the present and that's all we have? Or can we stand on the shoulders of the elders and see and project through wisdom into the future and foresight? And then the challenge of maturity, as the Urantia book talks about, is now, are we bringing all that into the present moment and making that more interesting versus just disassociating all of that stuff into the present moment?
Right. And if you're concerned about wisdom in decision making, it seems to me that the story you're telling yourself needs to be truthful in itself. I look at evangelical Christians, and they've got a story, but it's a story that's been shown to have no
traction,
no connection to reality. It's a story that basically was put together by a committee in the early 20th century. It's a story. It works. But how aligned is it with universe reality?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you as a student of history have seen this same pattern over and over. I always think about when the Urantia book tells us about when the ancient Hebrews were in Babylonian captivity and they destroyed all the records of Melchizedek. They destroyed the doings of the kings of Israel and the doings of kings of Judah. And then they built up their national and racial pride because obviously they were depressed people. But we lost so much history from that. And then now our Judeo-Christian brethren are completely confused as far as their true, accurate story of history.
Yeah.
And so now you're kind of putting some pieces back in the modern, the Newer Testament, but not so much. It's kind of tricky ground to go over the ancient history stuff. It's like, we look at all the Sumerian influences through Babylon into then the early Hebrew scribes, maybe Gilgamesh and other tales of actual people. And then those stories weave into the book of Genesis and things like that. I'm a firm believer that the story of Adam and Eve got so convoluted for the ancient Hebrew scribes or how they chose to interpret it that we are really reeling from sexual interpretations and functionality, racial interpretations and functionality, even fear of snakes and apples and stuff. It's just ridiculous. All these interpretations of things.
Yeah. Well, it's the whole question of story has been on my mind a lot because with the film, I'm basically telling a story. And I look at evangelical communities, and I've been in more than 50 religious communities and churches in the Denver metro area working on this film. So I've gotten a lot of firsthand. And
you filmed at pretty much all of these places, right?
A lot of them. So I look at Catholic communities, people go to Mass.
Okay.
And, after Mass, it's just a wonderful time. The families are there together. The kids all go to the same school. They've got community. They love God. The individuals have their spiritual experience. Evangelical Christians, they know about this conversion process. They know how to lead people to connect with the Spirit of truth in their minds, but they have no supportive story to support that, to support growth and development. And a lot of the, particularly Pentecostals, they just want to keep going back and experiencing that hit with the Spirit of truth.
Yeah,
it's a kind of
the
a
dopamine
mysticism.
rush of being saved over and over and over. It's kind of that one foot in, one foot out, keep going in and doing the spiritual hokey pokey, perhaps.
Yeah. So, the story is really, it needs to align with reality.
So besides making movies, I mean, how do you foresee stories being given back to people? Or is it, they're just going to have to go with the dynamic living teachings of the ongoing unfolding of the Spirit of truth, or this revelation, perhaps, if accepted? But, there's a lot of closed doors to accepting this revelation.
Yeah. It'll come along. It speaks for itself. So many people leaving the church. I think it's kind of interesting. I read a study that said, people are leaving the church, but they're not leaving spirituality. And they're creating what this author called bricolage religion. And bricolage is where you take a lot of pieces of junk and make a piece of art. So they take something from Rumi over here, and they take something from Christianity over here, and they just construct their own personal religion, and again, you're getting dumped into this existentialist space.
Yeah, I know. It's like, to me, I'm like, oh, it's cute. They're having a tea party. I know that sounds mean or whatever. We're just so fortunate to understand the dynamic living relationship that we can have with deity.
Yeah.
And maybe you could comment on that. Like, I know that there's probably people who are watching this who are my age and intrigued about growing closer to God and joining with God in their decision-making process, learning more about Jesus, learning more about this revelation, and how this kind of has tied in for you as a lived experience that has deepened your faith, not just your intellectual understanding of so many things. Right.
And that's really important. I myself am very much a Christian existentialist. I mean, I love the Urantia Book story, and my postmodern mind says to me, that's a wonderful story. You can work with that, but it's a story. It's a story. I make my story. Does it represent objective reality? It's the best explanation I've ever found.
Yeah.
But I live in that existentialist kind of postmodern space, and I'm really comfortable there. There's been a lot of very good theological work done to explain the relationship with God that takes place in that space.
But I know you, David, and I know that you've been forced into situations of living faith. Like, you had some pretty challenging situations throughout your life. We don't have to go into detail, but I can relate to where then now, if it wasn't for the personal relationship with God,
right, the personal relationship
beyond the understanding of all this.
The personal relationship is critical. If I step back into that existentialist space, one of the early existentialist philosophers was Soren Kierkegaard. And Kierkegaard says, you're in that little space, but God is in there with you, and you cannot be an authentic person without committing to where that Spirit of God leads you. Wow. That is what makes you an authentic human being.
Yeah.
And I like that. I feel like Jesus is my friend. He's the guy in the cubicle next to me over here working on this kingdom stuff. And,
that's a good picture.
Pop up and say, hey, what do you think about this over here? And we're companions. We're working partners. And
that's awesome.
That works for me, seeing Jesus as a partner, as a friend, as a companion in the kingdom.
Oh man, I love that picture. It's like, hey, what are you working on now, Jesus?
He says, you, dude.
You don't want to know. You don't want to know. Trust me, there's a lot of errors in this report. Man, yeah, I appreciate your sense of humor. I mean, I know that you've been responsible for being admin for the Urantia Facebook group online. And there's a lot of followers on there. What are you guys up to? Like 10,000 now? 13,000?
A little over 10,000.
10,000?
Yeah. The thing that's, it's not just 10,000 people. We have more than 3,000 of them that in a 30-day period participate some way in the conversations. So that to me that's good. 3,000 readers. And, there are a lot of Portuguese, a lot of Spanish.
And it's so hit or miss with interaction on Facebook because,
Sure.
I'll share stuff on there. Some things will get a bunch of hits, some things won't. But you never know what's happening. You just kind of leave it to the spirit to.
And you don't know what's really happening in people's lives, but I like it because it's totally decentralized. There are 10,000 people who are at least interested in the Urantia book. And there are other groups besides that. So I feel good about that.
One group that I admin is Urantia Book Science and History. And that's on Facebook.
Yeah,
with
it's a good one.
Tong and Josh Abernathy and some others. You've been a contributor to a lot of that stuff because you've done so much research and some of this historical things. And we've lost previously, peace be upon him, Bill Rocap recently.
Yeah, dear Bill.
Yeah.
Wonderful human being.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe you had some experience of being in that region where he was, in that Turkey area. If you got any stories you might want to share last time you were down there.
Turkey is just absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. It's its location. It's old Anatolia. It's right between Europe and Asia and the Middle East. It's right there. And the ruins, the history, it's just fabulous.
Ancient.
Fabulous.
Ancient, yeah.
I had this experience when Göbekli Tepe was just being uncovered. I connected with the German archaeologist who was uncovering that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he said, "Come on over. I'll give you a tour. We can chat." So I made arrangements to go over, and he died a month before I left.
Wow.
So I never made that. But Turkey, that's the.
Wow.
I don't know what Göbekli Tepe is. In my imagination, those sites are right at the location where the
garden went through?
Where the Andites coming up out of the garden would have turned left and headed out over the northern Mediterranean or headed right into India, into the Far East. It's like the last supply post, the last gas station, no gas for 200 miles.
The Andite outpost. Yeah, it seems like that. I mean, the Urantia Book talks about monolithic structures coming from the Andites. Some pretty serious stone structures there. And then as to interpretation of what the iconography is there, it's very garden animal-like, as it reflects. So.
It's all very fascinating. And then there's this whole string from Göbekli Tepe all the way across the northern Mediterranean, all the way to the British Isles of these circular stone structures.
Yeah. Can't help
that Andite culture.
Exactly. And isn't it interesting? I mean, you and I have an understanding about the Andite culture. People at home, perhaps some of you do, some of you don't, but it's basically having a certain percentage of violet blood from Adamic DNA. And I think it was, what was it, like 1/4 to 1/8 or something like that? 1/16?
Yeah.
Something like that. And so that would really, when it mixed with some of the evolutionary races that brought that uplift in spirituality and culture and craft and language, agriculture, everything got uplifted. And so where we see ancient agriculture along with permanence in the monolithic structures that were created, that's the telltale sign that there's Andite behavior there. That's just kind of blocked in my brain. I was blessed enough to hike the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, and there's a lot of Andite
content.
Yeah, and you can really see then where what was created originally by the Andite architects and how epically big it was and how seamlessly everything fit with one another versus when the later Inca people started ruling over there and it was just a little bit smaller brick patchwork on top of it.
Yeah.
So you can definitely see the the change. Something happened where they died out. And we learned a lot about the sacrificing. When you evolve to such nature worship, you start to sacrifice these Andite children instead of support them.
Well, that Andite coin has two sides.
Oh, yeah.
There's the aggression and the obstinance. It's in those Andite genes. It was northern and central Andites that started World War I. North, central, and southern Andites. In World War II, the Andites would just torn each other up all the way across Europe. I mean, it's not... there's two sides to that coin.
Well, the Urantia said that
because genes there.
Well, they said that the Nodites were belligerent.
Right.
And so then mixing with that and some of the evolutionary races, they said that that's when real war campaigns began.
Yeah.
And that's like when we open up the books of history, like the Trojan War and early Assyrian wars, early Hebrew wars, like Persian wars. We're like, whoa, these guys are crazy. What are they doing? But there was this desire to circumnavigate the world.
Yeah. But you look at what's happening today in Ukraine. You got northern and central Andites at it.
Post-Andites. But I don't think there's any real Andites. I don't know. Every once in a while, I will say this. Every once in a while, I'll see in professional sports, like NFL or NBA, Basketball Association or NFL, this genetic person who's just like superior in such, they're like huge, they're intelligent, they're incredibly nimble, and you're just like, oh, okay, something else is going on with this person. They're like 6'7" and can slam dunk and all these things. And then I see a lot of orange and green inheritance in the NBA, where you see really tall, but now they've been assimilated with other evolutionary races, where you're seeing like really athletic people who show a little bit different. Like the phenotypes are different.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Well, it is interesting, but this mongrelization of the human genome that we're doing is a total disaster. I think it's interesting that, the genome should be considered our most valuable natural resource.
Okay.
And it's interesting that we get this Urantia book, this message from an advanced civilization. And one of the biggest things they hit is, hey, guys, you're blowing it. You're destroying your genome, all of your potentials for genius. All of, so much is being destroyed because you're not taking care of that genome. One of the problems is really desirable traits aren't carried by single genes. They're carried by complexes of genes, sometimes 8, 10, 12 more genes to carry one characteristic. Once you split those up, getting them back together is going to be huge if it ever can be done. So we're just doing this general deterioration all the way around, and it's not good.
Well, so, it's a tough struggle for, I would say, I'm pretty apolitical and I just kind of stand and watch from the sidelines. But
chicken.
But well, I've gotten burned on both ends, so
I know. So have I. So have I. I take that back. You're much more of an eagle.
But just to see that, okay, well, this is a pretty touchy topic if you want to be politically correct. And yet I see a lot of Urantia book readers who call themselves progressive liberals. And so now you've painted yourself into a corner, because in that progressive conversation, how are we going to talk about preserving genomes and eugenics and stuff like that? You immediately get labeled.
Yeah.
And then now what do? You're kind of stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wildfire out of control.
So that then leads to, I feel personally, this vacuum for leadership, to where, because there is no real ministry in our revelation movement yet, where channelers can come in and kind of come in with this sci-fi scenarios of the future, kind of relax, we'll take care of it. It's all happening behind the scenes type of thing. I don't know if maybe you'd want to speak to that. I was talking to some people about the publication mandate. And I know you're a student of the Revelation history and stuff. Maybe you could fill people people in a nutshell of what it was like after Dr. Sadler died, and there wasn't real this leader head, and then how that unfolded due to people dying, and then where does leadership come in?
Boy, that's a huge issue, really a huge issue. The leadership collapsed. When I came along, one of the first things I did late 1960s was I took a trip to Chicago because I wanted to see who these people were. And I spent some time with Martin and Christy and some of the other ladies there, Mary and Raleigh. And, this is my personal opinion. I spent time with Christy there and got the sense of a really frightened old woman who didn't know what to do. Her Doc Sadler was gone. The people that had supported her on the Contact Commission were gone, and she was just lost. And then violating any confidences here. She told Martin, she said, when I die, you're going to be in charge of this operation. And she told Vern Grimsley, when I die, you're going to be in charge of this operation.
Oh, wow.
So when she died, here's this typical power struggle inside a religious organization. The whole fog thing happened. Martin left. And a real leadership vacuum happened, and I haven't seen any real leadership emerge, with the exception of maybe Meredith Sprunger, and he was isolated and not fully appreciated. But we haven't had leadership.
Yeah, we went down a rabbit hole on this. We
went down that rabbit hole. Yeah. I early on thought that all of the apocryphal stories should be totally ignored, and I should just go with the revelation, because those apocryphal stories are all secondhand. I went to visit Meredith Sprunger about 6 months before he started really declining, and spent a few days with him, and he gave me access to his entire archive of correspondence with Dr. Sadler and his early dealings with the Urantia Foundation and the Revelation. So I took all of those, and I had some things from Dwayne Faw and Julia Fenderson, things that I had collected, and those, it was just piling up in my little place where I live, these boxes of these documents. So Larry Watkins and Victoria Clark decided they wanted to set up a historical society. So I gave everything to them. Those are all on file now.
Cool.
On their website, ubhistory.org. And the documents are archived at the University of California, Santa Barbara, in the section on new religious movements. So all that stuff is there for people to go and check out. But if I could just back up to your comment about the production mandate.
Oh, the publication
mandate. There was no publication mandate that looked anything like this written document that came out. Carolyn Kendall and Charles Olivia were trying to build support for Urantia Foundation and UAI as the primary Urantia organizations, and they came up with Michael's plan and the publication mandate. And they talk about bricolage documents. They just assembled all these little pieces of secondhand information and presented them as if they were the will and direction of the revelators. And I have low tolerance for that kind of thing, very low tolerance. So I say unkind and mean things, and which I'm not going to repeat today. But I also strongly believe, I see in the Urantia book the respect for free will.
Right.
Absolute respect for free will. And I don't believe that the revelators told the Contact Commission, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. It doesn't make sense to me that they would do that. Partly because reality is constantly changing. I mean, from second to second, there are what now, 8 billion free will choices made, reconfiguring reality every second. They say that the seraphim are mathematical geniuses, and I've always thought that means to me that they can think in terms of statistical probabilities. They don't know the future, but they can calculate probabilities. But how far into the future can they calculate with increasing probabilities of error?
Weaker and weaker as you go.
Probably not a long time, given the turbulence out there. So I just don't think the revelators would have saddled us with directions.
Yeah, because then those can just be sabotaged real quick. There's no long-term plan of how it can unfold with backup contingency plans.
However, we've got the spirit of truth active out there. That spirit of truth is active in every human being. And I mentioned earlier about the loss of story. And partly why I think the Urantia book is important is that it provides a story, but it also configures concepts within the mortal mind that I think link with the ministry of the Spirit of Truth, the outworking of Michael's bestowal, in a way that empowers us to work more effectively in the world, to carry out the purposes of his bestowal. So I have a lot of faith in that and a lot of trust in that process.
That's great. Yeah, that's what I've come to my living faith experiences with, is just trusting and asking and really learning from the life of Jesus, and how the Spirit of Truth then kind of is this like teacher and friend in office hours, showing you the lessons in Jesus's life. So you can kind of pull more value and meaning out of each one of his real lessons. And I've found it almost a bit of a challenge of introducing Joshua ben Joseph to my Christian friends, because it's almost too much. They love Jesus already. They've committed to loving Jesus. And I'm always like, well, if you love this guy, wait until you hear about this stuff. But I have to rein it back a little bit, because you don't want to bombard someone.
How do you go about that?
Well, I always find whatever gospel stories I know that they've read already, that stories of Jesus that are in the gospel we'll talk about, and kind of I'll give it a little bit of life that is reflective of the dynamicness of Joshua, perhaps my interpretation of what it might hint to that's greater. I'm never like, oh yeah, you got to read the Urantia book right away.
Yeah. Oh, that's wrong. You know, you need to do that.
Oh man, yeah. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. This culture of, that's when you know it's intellectual. This like idea, because I'm comfortable with Jesus no matter what, however we're at. So it's not like we have to think the same thing for me to feel like I'm right.
Yeah, I don't like to get involved in the actual stories with those folks, but I do like to try to reinforce their personal experience with Jesus. Just reinforce that and try to support that. That to me is the key.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good lesson. As always, that personal relationship. And one of the unique things that with Jesus is that here we have this human demonstration that we can actually learn from. It's kind of contactable, knowable, relatable, all that.
Yeah.
And so, we have this administrative being of Michael, of Salvington, but this demonstration of Jesus is so knowable, and relatable. We're constantly in Mother Spirit's embrace, we can touch the one deity we can actually touch with our feet on the ground and stuff. And then they say the Spirit of Truth envelops us. So there's this friendliness, an older brother that's always there. I wish for the day for Christians and others to have the freedom to get to know him, not just the words and belief of.
Yeah. My heart goes out to those folks. I mean, there are literally millions of Christians out there in the world doing the best they know in terms of serving the work of the kingdom, trying to bring about the appearance of the kingdom of God on earth, trying to live Christ-like lives heroically. And I think, wow, we got all talk about a supply line. We got cold water and orange juice and steaks on the way, and we can reinforce what you're doing. I'm just hoping that down the road that can happen.
Specifically from us?
Well, through a discovery of the Urantia book, I don't know that you and me can do that. I just imagine that it might happen as a repercussion. Folks need to find the Urantia book. We've got the teachings of Jesus. That's the heart of it. But that book with its story is empowering and reinforcing. You talked about the history earlier.
Yeah.
That when I look at that, I look at the stories of the Lucifer rebellion and the Adamic default and the story of Melchizedek. And what I see there is the revelators completely renovating the collective unconscious of Christendom. They're just revitalizing all these stories, and the blood's starting to flow in the brain. And they give us new archetypes. They're reconstructing us on very deep levels. And I find that quite interesting to contemplate.
Yeah, you wonder at what levels they'll really hold traction. I mean, I think about video game development and movie development and all different types of creative efforts that then reflect the stories, like you're saying. How do we integrate these stories into the streams of society? I know you're doing it with your movie, and I'm trying to do it as much as possible.
You are. It's, one step at a time, pasito a pasito. And, that's all we can do.
Yeah.
I can't see into the future, but I can see the next step.
Oh,
and that
good.
to me is all I can do. I can see what the next step is. Okay, do this.
I'm blessed to have Urantia Book friends all over the world.
Boy, we sure are.
And I was listening to some regular sermon Zoom group from my buddies from Africa and my friend Karo Akamane. What's up, Karo? I just really appreciate the simplicity of understanding the revelation. And, some people's lives are so hardcore that they don't have to distract themselves between the saving truth and distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just really appreciate the simplicity and understanding of going in friendship with God and how that spiritualizes yourself when you choose to put your attention on that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That I see my brethren in this society over here, there's a lot of distraction that can come about, a lot of self-deification that can come about, and a lot of just like, stop lying to yourself, get down to this stuff, man. I find in our society, I've said this before, where it's like, unfortunately, a lot of people find God in prison or in rehab.
Yeah.
They have to humble themselves so much that they now are crying out, and blessed are the poor in spirit.
I have a friend who found God driving a VW bus across the Golden Gate Bridge in a winter storm.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. Yeah.
But, this living with God, living in the kingdom is really important. The world, it's nuts out there. It's insane. And the distractions are there all the time and can be really confusing and can degrade our performance. One of the stories I tell myself that helps me deal with that, I tell myself, you're an evolutionary mortal. You've been assigned to this primitive planet to work on this epical revelation. Just do your work. Everything is okay. Observe and learn. It is a real privilege. There are going to be times down the road when you'd give anything to be assigned to a troubled evolutionary planet. So enjoy it while you're here. Don't worry about it. It is in its early stages of development and has a long ways to go. And I can settle into that.
Wow.
That story and the role I imagine myself to be playing.
And that's called maturity, my friends.
You what?
That's called maturity. I'm a little anxious about things.
Insanity.
Well, you got to tell yourself something in a way that you can not give yourself a messiah complex,
Right.
Because when you're given such important information, you don't want to make yourself important.
You can't. Yeah.
I know that you have experience with a few self-important movements.
Or getting out of control myself when I was really young. You just think you're on top of the world, and You're not. Reality will slap you upside the face sooner or later.
Yeah. Well, maybe just one last question. We were blessed to celebrate Jesus' birthday here at the Boulder School, and you gave a great presentation and sermon, really, on the early church movement and early Christian figures and things like that. And I was just wondering if maybe how you feel there can be a little bit more of this kind of spiritual reverence in society without it being so call and answer and so formal, but yet really letting the Spirit speak. I know you have an understanding of the evolution of that, and I thought maybe you could let us go with, some spiritual tender understanding of this ministry.
Boy, it's just such an enigma, because the Spirit is so present, not only in us, but in art, in literature, in religion. The Spirit is really alive and present. I don't know how we get people to make that connection, reconnect out of this secularism that we live in. In the 17th century, they just tossed out anything transcendent, totally tossed it out. And here we are trying to get by in this complexity without God as a culture. Even the Christian nationalism out there, I mean, how present is God in that? It's just all this political stuff, which, by the way, has been an anathema for Christianity from day one as the Roman Empire was collapsing. This mixing and confusion of the spiritual kingdom and temporal kingdoms and leadership in the church and political, it is still this tangled up mess. You'd think after the 16th century, the 30 Years' War, when at least a third of the population of Europe was, Christians killing each other, at the end of that, there's just kind of this, oh man, we don't need religion anymore. It's terrible.
Don't worry. Then we had the secularists killing each other.
And, we still haven't recovered from those kinds of things.
Yeah. I like your version of, it's turbulent. It's turbulent. It's not going to slow down for a little while.
Yeah.
But I do like also having the personal relationship and living faith with the Spirit. Man, that's just like that hand that can pull you out of that turbulence and give you a perspective, sit you on good land, near good water, and observe and support.
And that's where we should be living, in our homes, in our hearts, in our intimate relationships. That's in the kingdom, and that's where there's not that turbulence, where we can keep peace and be growing and progressing and helping each other along the way.
What a ride where one can feel such deep peace in that inner bastion.
Yeah.
At the same time, the world is burning around you. This is great.
But we also can take that into the world with us. We have these big visions. Oh, we got to change the church, and we need 1,000 people over here. And I think, a lot of times, best thing I can do is try to lift up the guy that's bagging my groceries at Whole Foods, or the guy that's repairing my car. Can I lift these people up so that they feel better when I leave than when I arrive?
I love that. You're leaving them better than how you found them.
Yeah.
And I think also from my experience on this planet is that, can you do that even though you're in pain somewhat on your own? Are you letting the external environment drive your love? Or can you love in spite of everything that comes from this planet?
It needs to come from here.
Yeah.
And it's we can cultivate that and get it to flow. It takes time, but we can do it. It takes consciousness, but we can do it. You can do it.
You're saying like a practice almost.
Practice, yeah.
The practice of good cheer.
Right. The practice of good cheer. That's a good line.
All right. Well, David, I love you, man. Thank you.
Love you too, bro. Let's keep going.
All right. Oh, man, this is fun. We'll have to do this again, too. And don't forget all the awesome support that David has shared with us on the UBN app. That's free, and then you can check out all the cool projects he's doing, and there's more to come. So thanks again for all the hard work that you've done in the past and continue to do.
It's a pleasure.
All right. Well, We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for supporting us, and God bless.